Hi, in today's video I'm going to talk about Amazon's favorite rejection reasons when it comes to job interviews. First thing I'd like to talk about here would be lack of data-driven decision making. And this actually often pops up in conversation I have with candidates. So what does data-driven decision making mean? So for example, the core reason I publish Amazon keyworded videos on YouTube is because they link to revenue. Okay, so this statement, it's obviously a data-driven decision-making process, even though I didn't even mention any metrics here. Now, what you should take from this is there are roles for which data-driven decision-making matters more than for others. For example, if you're going for some sort of analyst role or in their delivery business, you can imagine that data will be core to every single example that you give. And where people make mistakes here, would be to either use the wrong metrics, either to not use metrics, or to use, more of a gut feeling approach or a more emotional side of things, an emotional type of speech, a motivational speech, if you want, when highlighting your decision-making process. All right, so what you should take from this is decide what is data-driven decision-making for your own role, what is quantification for your own role. The second thing I'd like to talk about here, the second reason would be difficulty in handling unexpected questions or situations. Okay, so what happens is that, yes, people do get stuck in Amazon interviews and they do get stuck quite a lot. Right? The core reason around this is because some questions are framed counterintuitively. You must really read between the lines. You must really score well on listening skills. Listening skills always paid off in Amazon interviews, and nowadays you don't have to buy my advanced trainings to find out a good number of the questions you might expect in the job interviews, and together with listening skills, that's the easiest way you can overcome this challenge, right? The third thing I like to talk about here would be the overuse of we statements. Okay, so what happens is that people who make up stories also tend to say we did this just in order to have a little bit of a cushion. I didn't do everything, but we did this, as a team. So basically my advice would be to reduce the amount of bluffing in job interviews. In my experience, it's not as much as about switching over to I did this whenever you can, which in fact might backfire, but more of a, ensuring that everything you say is something you actually did and you actually took ownership of. Now, when you might become susceptible of these things is often when you bluff, as I just said, but bluffing might not only happen in your stories, but also in your elevator pitch. And if you bluff your elevator pitch and you become susceptible, then throughout the conversation, this will pop up. Whenever you're going to say we, it's going to be a question sign, right? So this would be also something to keep in mind here, that this feedback is from people who got rejected and insisted for rejection feedback, because Amazon's public policy is against providing rejection feedback, which, by the way, I fully agree with Amazon that rejection feedback can be quite counterintuitive, so it's better not to push for it, but that's another story, right? And the fourth example I like to share with you, the fourth reason for which Amazon says they reject you as a result of these job interviews would be old examples. So if your examples are too old. Okay, so the definition of a behavioral interview is when they use your past experiences as a predictor of success in your new role. Okay, and Amazon uses behavioral interviews extensively. Now, if your experience spans across 4 decades, giving them examples that are 10 years old isn't such a biggie. However, if all your examples are over 10 years old, that's when, again, you're going to sound suspicious, right? Since you cannot really pitch all those stories as being extremely relevant for the type of job you're applying for, because, so to speak, things are moving fast, right? In e-commerce, just remember, like 4 years ago, AI wasn't even a thing, and nowadays everyone is using it pretty much on a daily basis. So you can imagine that there must be an educated guess between your choice of examples. And I know many of you have the better examples happening earlier in your career, but long story short, it's a blend. Okay, so I would like to end up with a very important note here. All these reasons, all these rejection reasons, while they do make sense up to a certain point. You shouldn't read too much between the lines of these examples, and I would very much encourage you to really deliver the best performance that you can in a job interview with Amazon, because putting together a great show and having a great story bank is far more important than really being aware of not using we at any point, or ensuring that you use metrics, so you use some numbers so they cannot say you cannot use metrics. It doesn't work this way. So if you perform, if you prepare, if you're serious about these Amazon interviews, your interview outcomes can be quite predictable. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.